Greetings and salutations to everybody out there in podcast land. This is the Judo Suey podcast, and I'm your host, Judo Dave Roman. Welcome back to another exciting episode of this podcast, and if this is your first time tuning in, I'd like to say welcome. I really appreciate you checking out the podcast. It means a lot to me. I hope you all are doing well and you've had an excellent week or month of training. I gotta say for myself, it's been a rough going lately. I probably complain about this stuff every 3 or 4 months, pulled muscles, back spasm, things like that. But my goodness, as I'm getting older, these things just don't go away. I've been struggling with a pulled groin for about 3 months now, and I'm able to roll through it for the most part. But doing any serious judo randori is a real tough one for me because it's just the movements are too dynamic, and if I got somebody doing that's really good at uchimata and they catch me with that, it really puts a strain on those muscles. So it's been a struggle for me the past few months doing judo. I still get out there. I'm still gonna go tonight. Tonight is Wednesday for me, and that's one of my judo days is Wednesday. So I think for me, at least for tonight and probably in the next couple of weeks or months, I'm going to have to stick with doing what's called yakusoku gaiko, which is otherwise known as, some people call it French randori. It's a style of randori where you really it's almost throw for throw, but you're really going 50%. I mean, it's randori, but you really have to have a training partner that knows exactly what you're going to look for in doing, and it's non-cooperative for sure, but it's just not the hard, 80%, 90, 100% some people tend to go. And unfortunately for me, I tend to not be able to do French randori with guys that are like in their 20s and they're young and they're bigger and stronger. It's just like I sit there and say, hey, let's just go a little light a little bit. We'll just move around, resist a little. And then they're like, okay. And that usually means for them, okay, you go light and I'll throw. So it's not quite as beneficial for me. But I do have some training partners in particular. As you guys know, Judo Joe, we tend to know what pace we like to go at, and it's a good randori. So I'm just gonna have to be very selective with my training partners, and that pretty much means like maybe 2 or 3 people on my list, and that's about it. So on this episode of the Judo Suey podcast, Steve Scott returns. I'm sure you guys, I know you guys have enjoyed the couple of other times that I've had Steve on the podcast. Well, he's going to be joining me today to discuss his latest book called The Judo Advantage, Controlling Movement with Modern Kinesiology. Now, this book, as of the time of this recording, was released just a couple of weeks ago. It's available for purchase on Amazon.com as a Kindle or as a paperback. You can also, I believe, you can go to like your local bookstore, like Barnes and Noble or Borders, if that place still exists. I'm not even sure, but I'm gonna have Steve on to talk about the book, his motivations for writing the book, and to gather some of his thoughts on coaching and preparing his students with the many principles discussed in this book. Now, I would like to add full disclosure, I have not finished reading the book yet. I'm still going through it. And I gotta say, though, from my perspective at my age and what my personal goals are in judo, this book could not have come out at a better time for me. Because, and this is gonna sound a little odd, when I'm doing judo, when I'm practicing judo, my personal training goals is far less about throwing people than it is about getting my body in the perfect position to execute throws. Because nowadays, I have enough skill that I can perform throws and really muscle them through and do a lot of stuff just to get somebody on their back. But that's not the approach for judo that I want to have moving forward and with the rest of my life, especially as I'm getting older and slowing down. I am personally very interested in the kinesiology of judo and more interested in getting myself in perfect position than it is just getting anybody on their back by any means necessary. And because I feel that by getting into perfect position and having exquisite timing, that the throw is going to happen anyway. So I hope that makes sense. By getting myself in the proper position, I can do randori with lighter people or even kids, and it doesn't feel like I'm muscling through things because of a size and strength advantage. That's kind of what I mean when I'm really looking to improve my positions and throws and such versus doing whatever it takes to get them on their back. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, I also want to touch on fight to win judo competitions again. I managed to see one, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a thoughts on what I saw in one of the contests that I watched. I think you guys will find this interesting. You'll find that I've maybe backtracked on some of my previous opinions. Not that my opinions were negative in any way, but I had some question marks, and after seeing a match, I got some of those questions answered. And a lot of you, I had some great listener reaction to the last episode of my podcast that I had with James Wall and running a judo club and being a professional judo instructor. So had a lot of reaction about that. Some overall positive, but certainly some negatives. And I want to get into some of the reaction from that interview. But first, I want to talk about the fight to win competitions that are specific to judo competitions and their events. Now, I talked about this initially and brought this to light for all of my wonderful listeners back in January when I had Judo Joe Kaiser on as a guest co-host. And back when I talked about this event, I had discussed potentially signing up for Flow Grappling because at the time I thought it was like $12.99 a month, which I thought it was a pretty good deal. But come to find out, when I sat down to watch this event live, I found out that that's $12.99 a month if you sign up for a year subscription. Otherwise, it's like $30 a month. And I can't remember if I've mentioned this in episodes since that episode back in January, but I just can't justify for myself spending $30 a month for any streaming service. And it's not so much because I'm cheap, even though that's part of it for sure. It's more out of principle. I wouldn't pay $30 a month for Netflix. For me, with anything that I buy, there's a price point, and if it exceeds a certain price point, I'm just not going to buy it. Even if I love the product, I'm just not going to do it. So it's not, or I should say, this is not any criticism toward Flow Grappling. It's just, for me as a consumer, that's just not a price point that I'm willing to spend money at. But a lot of people do, apparently, so all the more power to them. That being said, I did manage to see a fight to win judo competition that took place on March 9th in Dallas, Texas. It was against, the two competitors were Alan Shebaro and Garrett Andrews. Now, the person that posted this on YouTube, just shout out to a fellow whose username is Eric Pig with 2 G's. And I gotta tell you, I mean, this guy had a fantastic recording of the event. For starters, he recorded it in landscape mode. God bless you, sir, because I can't stand when YouTube videos or any sort of videos are recorded in portrait mode and you see the black bars on the side. That just drives me insane. But anyway, whoever this user is had the action. He captured the action really well. I had thought this was a rip from the original feed from Fight to Win, but no, this looks like it was somebody's camera. So again, I talked about this on my episode several months ago. The production value for these events is just top notch. I just couldn't believe how good the production is, and the competitors coming out to music. It's as if it's the UFC, except it's grappling. It's really cool. The lights, the colors, the crowd. It's a really cool vibe. And I think it's great to put judo on this kind of stage without, I don't know, I don't mean it in a negative way, but without the air of traditionalism. So this is the only contest that I've watched from Fight to Win, and I gotta say, this works. And I want to walk back some of my comments that I made in that episode a couple of months ago about my dislike for the 2 ippon rule. And the thing is, in this context on who this crowd is and what they're trying to achieve here, I'm like 90% in agreement with the 2 ippon rule. I totally get it. And I think the most important thing to having the 2 ippon rule is that, at least in this match that I watched, there was no rolling through on throws. These guys were really attempting to secure a hold down upon a throw. There was no pause in the contest. You didn't have somebody make a throw and then look right up at the ref to see if his hand is up in the air. And that's a good thing. And given that this crowd is I would venture to guess, largely a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu crowd, they're going to want to see some groundwork. And that's what these two gentlemen were offering in this competition, is that one of them threw was Seyanagi. And you know what I really liked about it too is that the ref called ippon. The match didn't stop. They kept going. They kept fighting. As a matter of fact, Garrett Andrews threw Alan Shibaro with a beautiful ippon Seyanagi, but instead of just stopping up and looking at the ref, Alan got back on his feet and Garrett attempted to throw him with ippon Seyanagi again. So the action was very high paced. And then later on in the match, Alan had a very nice Uchimata against Garrett, and he went right for the Yoko Shio Gatami, right, or maybe Mune Gatami, hard to tell with the video, but regardless of what you want to call it, he went right for the hold down. And I also got to add that the standard for ippon, at least in this match and some of the highlight videos I've seen floating around the interwebs, the standard for ippon is very high, certainly higher than what I see on the IJF World Tour. And I think that's a good thing. And I get why you have the 2 ippon now. I see it working. So that's why I say I'm 90% there with it. The other 10%, when watching this particular match, it looked like these two gentlemen, in terms of skill, were fairly evenly matched. And as I surmised in my previous episode, and this is why I was against the 2 ippon rule initially, or I shouldn't say against it, just not really in favor of it, is, look, I've said it, it's very hard to get an ippon on anybody that you're evenly matched with, and to get 2 is really a tall order. I think that showed in this particular match that I watched, especially when the time limit is only 7 minutes. I shouldn't say only 7 minutes, but for 2 ippon, that's not a lot of time, especially when 2 people are skilled, and especially when you consider the standard of ippon is very high, which that's a good thing. But it's just, I would venture to guess that's very hard to achieve. Now, if it was somebody like a ham and egger like me going against somebody like Ryan Reeser, yeah, I'm sure he could get 2 ippon on me in under 30 seconds. But when people are evenly matched, that's going to be a tough thing to do. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the cons that I saw in this particular match. And please, if Alan and Garrett happen to be listening to this podcast, this is not a criticism of your performance, and this is not a criticism of your strategy. Please understand that I am not criticizing either of you two. You guys fought well. It was a very, very entertaining match. But I must say, seeing these rules in action, I was hoping to see a lot more groundwork or attempts at improving positions than I did. So to further illustrate what I'm talking about, I saw a lot of use of the turtle for stalling, and I don't think that's a good thing. And I don't think that for this crowd, largely Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu crowd, that I don't think that's a good look, because it almost reinforces every single stereotype that a lot of people have about judo's groundwork. Or maybe stereotype's not the right word. Maybe the criticisms that you might hear from people outside of other sports when they talk about judo groundwork. You know, so a lot of people complain about, they just sit there and turtle. They don't do anything. Well, unfortunately, in this particular match, I saw a lot of that, and I would love to see a rule change, or maybe Fight to Win experiments with this kind of rule change, that if a person turtles too much, Or if they use the turtle just to stall, that, I don't know, maybe add a Shido. And maybe 4 Shidos can equal an Ippon score for the other competitor. So let's say the matches are tied at 0. Well, if you get 4 Shidos, then the other person gets the equivalent of 1 Ippon. You don't win the match, but you get the equivalent of 1 Ippon. And then maybe you can set it up in a way where you cannot have a winner by Shido. So I'm not suggesting that you can win by Shido. Not if it's 0-0. So, and I'm just freestyling here. So maybe if it's tied 0-0, the first person to get 4 Shidos, the other person gets an Ippon score, and then now the match can continue. And then if the competitor does it again, they're not really racking up Shidos anymore, but they're really losing the match, so they have to push the action. And you don't even have to call it a Shido. Call it a penalty. Call it a delay of game or delay of contest. But I think when the contest is 7 minutes long, you need 2 Ippon to win or a submission, and a competitor can eat up 30 seconds of clock by using the turtle. I just think the turtle needs to be eliminated for stalling purposes. I don't know what Fight to Win does in its Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments or competitions, but I can't imagine Jiu-Jitsu guys staying in turtle for 30 seconds or more without doing anything. And as I said before, the great thing about having the 2 Ippon rule is the competitors, they get 1 score, they're still fighting, they're still trying to angle for position and stuff. But if you turtle in judo, you're stalling, and I don't like seeing that. Now, again, I want to make it perfectly clear, I am not being critical of either of these gentlemen's skills on their feet or on the ground. As a matter of fact, I believe Alan Shibaro is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and I'm pretty certain that Garrett Andrews also is doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, though I'm not quite sure of his rank. But Mr. Shibaro certainly, I think he has his own club, Shibaro Jiu-Jitsu. So I know these guys know what they're doing on the ground. So I don't want anybody listening to this segment to come away from this thinking, these judo guys, they can't even deal with the turtles. No, because Alan Shibaro certainly is a jiu-jitsu black belt, and he definitely knows how to deal with the turtle. But when you incorporate the turtle in competitions, groundwork takes a lot of energy to open up that turtle, to turn around. I mean, it's a lot of work. And, in these matches, you got to conserve energy, especially when you can lose on your feet just as easily as you can lose on your back. So anyway, Fight to Win. The competitions are great. If you can watch it, if you're willing to shell out the $30 to watch the next Fight to Win for both Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo, I highly recommend it if that's your thing. But like I said before, for me, if I'm not shelling out $30 for Netflix, I'm not going to shell out $30 for Flow Grappling. Sorry, guys, but I love what you guys do regardless. It's time for my favorite segment of the Judo Chop Suey podcast. What time is it? Listener reaction. So I had a lot of great listener reaction, not necessarily just an email, but there was a lot of discussion on Reddit. There was certainly some email that I received. The interview with James Wall, which I thought was a fantastic interview, and I appreciate all of you for listening to that interview, because it's probably one of my better ones, quite frankly. I've said it before. I don't feel that I'm a very good interviewer, but I enjoyed doing that interview with James, and I felt that I got a lot of the questions right, and I felt that the discussion went in the direction that I had hoped that it would go. The reaction was very mixed. Actually, let me take that back. It wasn't so much the reaction was mixed, but there was a lot of people liked the interview. A lot of people liked what James is doing, but there are some things that a lot of people didn't like about what James does and how he runs his business. And I thought it was very interesting to see the reaction. Mainly, a lot of people have problems with the belt testing fees, and a lot of people have problems with judo being in excess of $100 a month. But it was the belt testing fees that generated the strongest reaction, both on Facebook Messenger, an email, and even some of the posts on Reddit. So I thought that was really interesting. I'm not sure what to make of belt testing fees myself. I mean, I'm not a club owner. I've never ran a business myself, so I don't know how I would approach it. I suppose what I might try and do is, if I have an idea of what those fees would be for a test, and I anticipate having maybe 2 promotion periods a year, or maybe 4, I might take the cost of what those tests would be per individual and maybe spread that over 12 months and include that as part of the price. I mean, heck, doesn't Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of sort of do that? You might not pay a belt testing fee, but some of you guys out there are paying anywhere between $150 and $225 a month. How do you know that belt testing is not a part of those costs? You really don't. You just pay that price just because you want to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I suppose if I had a club, I might go that route and have the prices a little bit higher, but it does encompass all of that, that kind of thing. But in terms of my accounting and budgeting, I would not necessarily count that increase of price toward my, what goes into the business or into my pocket. That increase would be a separate part of the ledger, or whatever you want to call it. And some people out there supported the belt fees because, as some have aptly pointed out, and as I've seen myself personally, just about every successful martial arts school out there, whether it be taekwondo, karate, kung fu, whatever the case may be, most of them have belt promotion fees. And I would venture to guess that if James were to get some of the onslaught of criticism about belt testing fees, and these criticisms was coming from club owners, I would venture to guess James would say something along the lines of, well, how's that working for you? And I'm not attempting to put words in James's mouth. I'm just saying that James is a professional judo instructor with one of the largest clubs in the United States. And he has seemingly found a formula to have a successful judo program. And Baton Rouge, Louisiana, look, I've never been there, but I can't imagine it's anything like LA or New York City. But I also can't imagine it's anything like, I don't know, Leesburg, Florida, someplace way up north that hardly anybody lives. So my point is that it's clear that the prices that James is setting for his program is a proper market value. And I know there's some people out there that may say, well, you're pricing me out of being able to train at your club. And, well, I mean, that may be true, but how is that different than a lot of other martial arts that charge exorbitant amount of money? It's like what I would venture that anybody else would do. I know that I would do. I would just find another club. I mean, where I go to in Ybor City Jiu-Jitsu, if they were charging $200 a month, I would have to find another club. And I'm pretty sure there are some places in Tampa Bay that charge that amount or close to it, certainly more than $150 a month. And like I mentioned before with the Fight to Win subscription services, that's beyond my price point. And for some people, the money that James charges per month is going to be outside of people's price points. And that's okay, because it's, for him, it's certainly not outside of the price point for a lot of other people. So he seemingly found that sweet spot, and he's making a living off of it. And I think that's a good thing. And I think it's a model that a lot of other judo club owners should be looking at and trying to grow their clubs. And, one more thing about the belt promotion fees. Now, I didn't pay any belt promotion fees for my Q ranks, but I did for my Dan ranks, that's for sure. And if you look at the promotion fees for USA Judo, those numbers go up and up for no reason whatsoever. So, for example, I believe with USA Judo, if you are promoted to Shodan, you have to pay $150 to USA Judo. If you're promoted to Nidan, you gotta pay $175. And I think for Sandan, it's like $200. So you're paying belt promotion fees, if you stick around in judo long enough, you're going to be paying belt promotion fees. And quite frankly, I don't understand why not only USA Judo, but the other the other judo organizations, apart from the Judo Black Belt Association, they also charge fees that go up and up and up as your rank goes up. And I don't understand why. It's really silly, because it's not like the certificate that they are creating and the price for postage that they're sending it to you is going to cost any more money between Shodan, Nidan, Sandan, etc. So I don't understand. It's funny to me that I rarely see people go up in arms, when they got to pay $300 for a Godan certificate, but belt promotion fees for a Q rank, people, some anyway, are losing their minds. So I appreciate all of the listener reaction, both like I said, online, through Facebook, and email. If you want to email me or email the show, which is also me, you could do it at judochopsuishow@gmail.com. You could always follow me on Instagram at La Vida Judoka. My Instagram is awesome. You can also follow me on Twitter at La Vida Judoka. And you could also follow me on the Facebook page for the Judo Chop Suey podcast, which I rarely actually use it other than to announce when I'm releasing new episodes. But you can always go there and leave a comment, or you could just hunt me down on Facebook. And you could add me as a friend. But if you do that, please at least mention to me, shoot me a message saying that you listen to the podcast, because I don't accept friend requests from people that do not have mutual friends or are not podcast listeners. Sometimes, I get these Russian women asking me if I can be their friend, and I have to reject them. All right, I think I've blabbed quite long enough. Gosh, I think I'm about almost a half hour in before I've even managed to bring in Steve. I'm sure most of you are like, get on with the interview already. God. All right. Without any further delay, Mr. Steve Scott. Welcome back. Steve, welcome back to the Judo Chop Suey podcast. How you doing today?
I am doing well, Dave. Thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming back on. We were talking about this off air, that this is the third time you've been on, and coincidentally, it seems like every time I bring you on, it's always in March, right before spring starts. So I appreciate you making the time again.
I'm glad to be here, and like I was telling you earlier, the snow has melted, and this is a nice March. The spring is on its way, so I'm in a better mood.
Yeah, I can understand that. In Florida, it's always in the 80s, so I can never complain.
Yeah, life must really stink down there, you poor man.
So Steve, tell me what's been going on with you. The last time I saw you in person was at JudoCon, and of course, I've been following your Facebook pages and certainly your YouTube channel. And not only that, you've got a new book, which is the main reason why I brought you back onto the podcast. But let's catch up the listeners and let them know what's been going on with you. And if you could, maybe give some parting thoughts on JudoCon, how you felt about it.
Okay, well, we've been busy since November, the last I saw you. We got, I guess we were talking about earlier, the book is wrapped up. It's now on the market, so we'll talk about that in a bit. But here at Welcome Mat in Kansas City, we really have two locations. Kenny Brink has a huge kids program at one of the facilities, and then Derek Darling has he also has judo, but he also has sambo and jiu-jitsu as well, and some MMA at another facility. So we've been really busy with those two gyms, and you were at Derek's gym, at JudoCon. So
Yes.
So that's a going project and doing well. And the YouTube page, the YouTube channel, I should say, is really growing. We've got over 14,000 subscribers, and for anyone listening, it's Welcome Mat Steve Scott. We love to have more subscribers, totally free, and we've been really busy cranking out the videos in some gym dojo photo shoots or video shoots. So we've got a lot of new content up there, and we actually listen to people when they say we'd like to see this, or a particular video on something, both on their Facebook platforms as well as when they come to our YouTube channel. We listen to them and want to try to provide those type of videos. So it is, viewer driven in what we provide in many ways. So and that's a lot of fun because it keeps me on my toes. It really does. So, but and then we wrapped up JudoCon, and it was a successful one. We had, gosh, I think we had over 60 people from, I can't remember how many states now, at least 10 different states. It wasn't like, a whole bunch from every state, but it was a good mix of people. And we the idea of JudoCon, which, by the way, I want to give every bit of credit to Scott Decker, who in 2014 hosted the very first, judo conference.
Right.
And my wife chimed the name JudoCon. Judo conference makes sense. Yeah, JudoCon. And so I want to give Scott that was out in the Phoenix area, and we didn't have one until last year. Again, we just got it together. We want to do it right, and we did. So we had a number of speakers there. You attended. We had some rank testing. It was just a great event. We saw where we made some mistakes, and we wanted to correct them. And now this next year, at least this year in 2019, Anne Maria DeMars is going to be hosting it in Los Angeles, November 1st and 2nd. And she's a great organizer, by the way. I mean, she's a very successful businesswoman. And so she's got things pretty well lined up in LA for November 1st and 2nd of this year. So, and in fact, as I just talked to her just about 2 days ago, and just a planning type conversation, she called, and she's really we talked about the good stuff and the bad stuff that happened at JudoCon this past year.
Well, I thought it was all good.
I appreciate that. There were some things we wanted to make better, actually, and I think she's really on track for doing that. So we're going to have James Wall back to do a very he did a great, by the way, session on dojo management, running a commercial judo club, and I know you've had him on your show.
That's right.
Yeah, show, and he'll be back. We're doing a thing with him again in November at JudoCon. We're having some other things. Of course, Anne Marie will be there. I'll be there. My wife Becky will be there. So we'll have some of the same presenters, but we're going to draw on some of the local talent from Los Angeles that's going to be there, and I'm really looking forward to a lot of those folks to work with them. So anyway, that's kind of what we've been doing, planning for this year, and of course we've got the our AAU national tournaments coming up. We have the Junior Nationals coming up May 4th in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And we're having our Seniors and Masters Nationals June 8th in Dallas, Texas. And we have information on all our YouTube, or I should say our Facebook platforms, if anybody wants to go and get information about that. So, we've been busy. And that's at my age, I'm retired from my job, and this keeps me out of trouble. I really enjoy doing it.
That's great, Steve. Now, I want you to talk a little bit about your freestyle judo show that you have on YouTube, because I know many of the listeners are familiar with the technique videos that you seemingly pump out on a regular basis. Now, by the way, before we get into the freestyle judo show, I'm curious to know, do you have a library of videos that you've collected over the years and then you publish them, or is this stuff that you are constantly recording and uploading?
Well, actually, a little bit of both. What we started doing videos, and it's kind of an interesting. This might be kind of a funny story to start here. 2010 or 2011, Mike Pennington, one of my good black belts, he's in a lot of my videos.
Right.
He came to practice once, and he said, "Hey, coach," he said, we really should video this stuff because it's great. I'd like to go back on it and review this again, and other people should see this. It's really great stuff. I said, "Oh yeah, right." He said, "No, really, I mean it." I said, "Sure." And okay, so a couple practices later, he shows up with a little bloggy camera, and one of those little small, inexpensive video cameras. And
I had one.
Yeah, well, I did too. Mike gave it to me. He said, "Here's how it works." And I was dumb as a rock on this stuff. I really was. Still pretty much am. But he said, "Show me how to use it." He said, "Let's just video our drills and anything." He said, I'll take the videos. You just coach, And we started doing that. And they were pretty rough end, stuff at the time. And then as I said, "Well, this is kind of fun. Mike's right. We can make a difference. We can get coaching out and more people can see some of this stuff. Not that I have all the answers, but I do have some of the answers. And so as time went on, we started to video more and more of our practices. And we got to the point where now we have like several cameras. And I actually went out and bought a really nice Sony camera that, not super expensive, but expensive enough, a video camera for just doing this type of work. And so we usually have a couple of cameras going at just about a lot of our practices. So the last probably 5 to 7 years, we've just done video of just the workouts. So what I have is this collection of a lot of video that I've go ahead and kept here on flash drives, etc. And so I'll draw on that a lot of times to come back with some good technique. And as I'm learning more about editing and stuff like that, it's become a bit of a hobby now for me. So I'm learning more how to edit and do it a little bit better on some software that I've got. It's been kind of fun. So yes, and now we do continue to video our current workouts as they were practices, and so I try to intersperse those with some of the older stuff. So like if somebody's watching the the YouTube channel, they'll see us in one of the dojos and they'll see us in another dojo, because they were actually videotaped or videoed in different times. So that's why it's like we're jumping around in different places, but it's just over a period of time. So yeah, we've done a little bit of both. And yeah, I do have a massive number of videos. And the cool thing about YouTube is that they let you, do your video and you can download it on your channel and then schedule it for a later play date. And so we have videos queued up, averaging about 16 videos a month from now up through the end of 2020. I've got, I think I've wrapped up all of December of 2020. So we have at least 16 videos a month, every month up through December of 2020, ready to go. So, and it's new material. It's and a lot of times some of the older material, I'll come back and we'll revisit it and I'll re-edit it and we'll get something different out of that video shot. It'll be kind of a same subject, but a little more expanded on it, just because I know how to edit better these days. So
sure,
that's inside baseball for everybody. But anyway, so keep watching the YouTube channel because there's going to be a lot more content coming up. And again, that's that December 2020 date. As we keep making more new videos, we're going to keep extending more time out, as far as we can. And I don't know how long I'll be able to physically do this. But as long as I have some young, tough guys like Derek and Eric Weaver and, guys who are on the mat constantly doing the techniques, I can talk all day long and coach, and they can do all the great techniques they do, and we can keep doing this for a while. So anyway, that's kind of the plan, and that's what's going on, with what's been going on with our YouTube channel. And thank you for mentioning it. I really appreciate it.
You have recently authored a book called The Judo Advantage: Controlling Movement with Modern Kinesiology. Now, I have not finished reading this book yet. I've just started it. It downloaded on my Kindle just a couple of days ago. And I told you last year, you told us last year that you were in the process of writing this book and you finally finished it. And I said to you then that I'm going to have you on as soon as the book is finished so you can talk about it because I'm really excited to really deep dive into this book. So, if you would tell the audience, what was your motivations for writing this book? And I know you have authored several books in the past. I'm not quite sure how many. I think certainly at least maybe close to 10, maybe more. I'm not quite sure. Maybe you can answer that. But what was your motivations for writing this book?
Well, this was my 19th book, 19th published book,
okay.
On a variety of subjects relating to the martial arts. And coaching is near and dear to me. And of course, I love judo. But, years ago, when I started coaching as a very young man, there were very few good references, like one go-to book that would help any coach or any advanced student, any serious student of judo, whether he was a young coach, old coach, or just an athlete wanting to learn more about why judo works. But I wanted to, in one single volume, why and how judo works, and it could be done. I think I did it in this one. And you don't have to, have a lot of educational ease to do it. You can write it in a way if you work on it hard enough, you can write it in a way that makes it understandable. And I'm not saying dumbing down by any stretch, don't get me wrong, but it's understandable for the general public, but it's also interesting enough for anyone who is serious about it, that they will, that they'll learn why and how judo works. And another aspect that I really think is important is how to tie in, the biomechanics of judo, the modern science, empirical evidence of why judo works, with time-honored tradition of how we've taught judo for many years. And because a lot of people say, well, this is the new judo, this is the modern judo. We forget what those old guys did. That's the past. Well, I disagree with that, because first of all, Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo, was a genius, a man that really did much to change the world with his judo. And he laid a lot of foundations for judo that people don't realize, and it's very important things. Just let's take, for example, well, real quick, I wanted to tie these traditions of judo, how we've traditionally been teaching it, and show how it makes a lot of sense in modern scientific approaches to doing movement. So like Kano, an example of one of the brilliant things he did that we all take for granted was how we actually grip each other, the kumikata, the actual meeting together to grab a hold of each other, and basically a lapel and sleeve technique. Now, he invented how to do that somewhere in the very early 1880s, when he was just starting the Kodokan, because he saw there was no mutually agreeable way to hold on to each other to be able to exchange techniques, to just practice. So he invented a way to actually hold on to each other. Now we take that for granted, but it's absolutely brilliant. It's in its execution and the way we do it. And to that, he also invented the modern judo gi, the uniform. How he really fashioned it to where we have it today. He lengthened the sleeves to down the wrists, the knees, the pants down to the ankles. He invented, how the sturdy belt we use. He invented all that. And it's an interesting thing about how he invented the judo gi, and he, like the lapels we grip, that they're sturdy. Well, right. He did that so we could grip better, for number one, get a better grip in kumikata. And he also did it because he really enjoyed lapel strangles. His shimewaza was very quite good at lapel strangles, and that was a hallmark of the early days of Kodokan Judo. They did a lot of lapel strangles. So he made the lapels nice and big so you could use them to strangle an opponent with. And those are cool little things that Kano did that I thought was brilliant. And because, frankly, it is brilliant what he did. And many of the other advances, the concept of kazushi, he invented that. He invented kazushi, the breaking of the balance. And so I wanted to have a book where we could tie in a lot of these great things in judo that we've been teaching for years, and show that how they work from a biomechanic point of view, of the kinesiology. Kinesiology is the study of human movement, and what better thing to study human movement than judo? And I wanted to write a book about why and how that should be done, why and how that works. And this is a good reference guide, I really believe, for any serious student, but certainly for coaches, that they can come back and they can say, well, I'm having trouble, if my student learning, his entry is maybe into a particular technique, maybe I can, here's some answers in this book I can find. And you, right. Coach, can use this as a reference. So that's why it's a one-stop shopping. It's all in one book, I think. Again, not all the answers, but I tried to cover a variety of different topics. A good example, I think it's chapter 8 off the top of my head. I talk about surikomi, the action of surikomi. Yes, it is chapter 8. Yeah. So that action of the lifting, pulling action, again, guess who invented that? Kano. And he developed that. Of course, his students later developed it where it's a fine art, literally, and a science. But the concept of surikomi, we use it all the time. Well, I've never seen a book anywhere written that breaks down and analyzes what the movement, the action of surikomi is. Well, I wanted to write something about that, and there it is. It's there. And so a coach can go in there and look and say, oh, this makes a lot of sense. This is in biomechanics. It's all backed up by good science and facts. But again, we go on the basis of what we've been learning for years has been really quite efficient. And I kind of wanted to prove that. I kind of wanted to prove Kano right in a biomechanical modern way, because some people will say, it's that old-fashioned stuff doesn't work. You're a traditionalist or this and that. Honestly, Kano was a genius, and I wanted to give him credit for the great invention he gave us was judo. And another thing I also wanted to point out in the book, and I hope everybody buys one so I can get rich and famous, but just kidding. Yeah, but one thing I would like everyone, if you do buy the book and read it, please read the introduction carefully, because being a bibliophile that I am, I love books. I always make it a point to read the author's introduction. He sets the table for what he's going to tell you in the rest of the book, and I'm no different. So read that introduction, and you'll see. I'll make a very good case why we should continue and always use the Japanese terminology for judo, because it's one of the international language of judo. But we use Japanese in the same way that a doctor or a lawyer would use Latin. It's
Right.
a precise general language, the generic language we use. And when we have to finalize an answer, if you're a lawyer, you'll go to the law books and it'll be in Latin. Well, same with judo. If you can look at the concept of kazushi, what is it? Well, Kano gives you the answer, because he's invented a word for it. Kano was brilliant. Another thing he did was invent things, or invent words and phrases that describe a technique. And we kind of take that for granted in all phases of life. But consider this, in the 1800s, in the feudal jiu-jitsu of Japan, that wasn't done in any of their martial arts. They had flowery names. They had, this, named after someone else or whatever. But Kano, being the educator that he was, very pragmatic guy, he said, no, we need to name things for what they based on their concept, their principles, and based on their function. Now, not all techniques, some techniques like Tani Otoshi, Valley Drop. Okay, so some retain some of their old jiu-jitsu names, but almost probably the vast majority of all things the concepts, the Japanese terminology we use is based on rational thought, and generally it's from Kano. So we just add to that. And I wanted to point that out in this book, because I think it's important that people do learn the Japanese terminology. And you don't have to speak Japanese fluently. I certainly don't. But I always say I don't speak Japanese, but I can speak judo. And,
Right.
And so I think that's, I wanted to bring that out in the book too, that definitively we should use that and make it a point of doing that. And so I tried to tie the traditional aspect of teaching judo with a modern empirical approach. And hopefully I did a good enough job that people want to buy it and use it as a reference material for many years to come. I really, really hope so. So that's why I wrote the book. And it's just kind of a good overview of what the book's about, actually.
And I agree. I do agree with you on using the Japanese names for the techniques, because as you said, you use the example of Tani Otoshi. Well, anytime I hear of a technique that uses the word Otoshi, I think of body dropping, some kind of a drop type throw. So to your point, I think it's very important to use that terminology, because I remember about a couple of weeks ago I was on an online judo discussion forum, and this person, he was a beginner, but he was describing this throw that he was doing. It ended up being Tai Otoshi. Okay. But he was describing this throw, and he told us that his instructor called it the banana split throw. And but I explained to him basically what you were saying about the meaning of the words, the names of the throws having meanings, that kind of description is completely meaningless to communicate what the throw is doing.
Correct. Yeah.
But using the Japanese terminology, even if you're, because I'm doing primarily judo now out of a Brazilian jiu-jitsu club where we have a couple of classes a week in judo, and even though people that do Brazilian jiu-jitsu tend to be laid back, I think it's still important to communicate, the Japanese names of the throw and what that throw means, because there has to be meaning in what you're doing, or else you can't. I don't think you can. develop a good understanding on how to throw works if you don't understand what it means.
Exactly right. And another point to that is judo. The Japanese is the international language of judo. And one time, many years ago, I was in Sweden doing a training camp with part of a U.S. program over there. We were attending a Swedish training camp. And so, I was coaching, of all things, I was coaching Tai Otoshi, showing how to do Tai Otoshi. And when I said initially, when we started, in English, because I don't speak a word of Swedish, I said, we're going to do Tai Otoshi. Well, guess what? Everybody knew Tai Otoshi was going to be taught because they all understood Tai Otoshi. And we got along fine. I mean, I made my points, and everybody got the idea of how to do Tai Otoshi because that was the generic language of judo, the Japanese. And I think every the nomenclature needs to be link us together with the rest of the world. And you make a good point about the banana split throw, but it's interesting. I had not an argument, but shall we say a serious discussion with a coach some years ago who was a modern, upbeat coach. He knew all the latest cool stuff. And he was telling me, he was really getting on to me about using all this Japanese. And he was surprised. I was such an innovative guy and blah, blah, blah. And I'm surprised you're such an old traditionalist using an old Japanese. And I made my point. And he said, I just call, and he talked about Tomoe-nage. He called it the monkey flip throw. And so my counter argument was, I said, monkeys can flip around a lot of different directions, can't they? Honestly. And I said, I said, I can't envision a monkey. I envision a monkey flipping the other way. And of course, I kept doing that to make him madder, which it didn't work actually, by the way. But nonetheless, my point was, there was no common language. A monkey flip, might mean something totally different to somebody else because there's no commonality about that, and how do you say monkey flip in Swedish? I don't know,
Right.
So I couldn't have possibly taught that to that Swedish group. So that's, I think the common language of judo is the Japanese. And I think it's important to do that. And I get this, my very first sensei, Jerry Sweat, God rest his soul. He was a wonderful man. And, he was a very strict Nidan from the Kodokan. He did speak Japanese fluently. And so he made sure when I started judo at the age of 12, we sat down, he didn't make it, like boring or anything. He made it interesting. And so we learned the Japanese words, and I got this concept of knowing this Japanese from Jerry. He said, kids, this is, if you go to Japan and you say Serenagi, they'll understand you. If you go to France, and he made that point, and it made a lot of sense. And so I give Jerry Sweat full credit for guiding me in the right direction, and I'm so glad he did. And I think it's important. And my own students, again, they don't have to speak volumes of Japanese, but they do have to know the nomenclature that I think is important, so they can go anywhere in the world and have a good conversation about judo, and have an intelligent conversation about judo, and with somebody else who's equally as intelligent. So I think that commonality of language enables us to do that.
So Steve, when did you start thinking about in your own personal life the movement of judo? Because I would have to believe that there was maybe a moment in time, a genesis of sorts, where you started thinking about judo in the way that you are expressing in your book here, the Judo Advantage. I'm curious because when you're young, when you're a kid, obviously you're just doing what the sensei says, and when you're a young adult athlete, you're just training to be the best judoka competitor that you can be. But I'm curious to know, when did you in your life start thinking about judo in more deeper terms, in this way that you are expressing in your latest book here?
Well, that's a good question, Dave. I think one of the things that I was when I was coming up as a young athlete, I started at 12 in 1965 at the age of 12. By the way, there were a lot of people doing judo back then. And so, again, I did what sensei taught me and all the movements and all that. And I always considered myself a good athlete, but not a great athlete. And because of that, from the time I was pretty much a kid, I think again again with Jerry Sweat's guiding on this, I had to figure out how to do things a little better for me because I wasn't, I was a big kind of thick kid, and I wasn't necessarily well coordinated, and I had to figure out not a cheat way to do it, but a better way to do it for me. And I kind of went on this along the line, but eventually I ran into a guy named Morris Allen, and he was a Scotsman, and he was over here in 1976. And when I got interested in Sambo in 1975 or so, and I was steered toward Morris Allen because Morris was the world Sambo champion. He was also a world-class judo man, world class, I think, freestyle wrestler. And he was hired by an old millionaire, and of all places, Bentonville, Arkansas, or Rogers, Arkansas, northwest Arkansas, near Fayetteville. And they had a beautiful dojo called Ichiban, and this gentleman named Robertson. And he would hire instructors and keep them about a year or two, and then they'd go on and he'd help them get their citizenship or whatever. I don't know how it worked exactly, but Morris Allen was over here teaching judo, just about a 4-hour drive south of where I am. And I was directed to find Morris Allen if I wanted to learn about Sambo. Well, it turned out he was also tremendously talented in judo. And so the first time I went down there, I was about 6'3.5", 4 inches tall, and weighed about 225 pounds, good sized fella. And he was about 6'2" and about 185 or 190, and he tore me from limb to limb. I mean, this guy was one of the best judo men I ever touched in my life, and in Sambo too. And he was very nice about it. He just didn't beat me up. And he said, "You have potential. I'll train you if you keep coming down. I'll train you and help you out." I said, "Wonderful." And we had this relationship for some time until he moved on. I think he ended up moving on to Virginia, where he's still in Virginia now. But he was the first to tell me something which literally changed me. And in the very first meeting in 1976, he called me Stevie. He said, "Stevie," he said, "you're doing judo like you're 5'10". He said, "You're 6'4". He said, "Why are you trying to do judo like a short man?" I said, "Well, that's the way I've always learned it." He said, "No, make your judo work for you." He said, "Make the technique work for you." And so we talked about that. And that was the genesis right there. The light went off, the light bulb went off over the head at that point. And I said, "Yeah, I've got to make this work for me. So I'm a big, tall dude. How can I make any technique work for me more efficiently because of my height? And now that I love coaching, how can I make this work better for my students? So how can we develop this technique, teach them the basics, yes, but let's mold that technique to fit them like a good suit, or mold it like a glove so it fits the hand perfectly." And that got me on that road. That working with Morris Allen in 1976 changed it. That was the big moment. Up to that point, I was leading up to that. I was very open to it. I was groping around trying to figure out how to do the best way for myself. And then I met this guy, and he really changed me. So all the credit in the world goes to Morris Allen. And if anybody in the Virginia area, find that guy. He is a master of judo, and he's one heck of a nice man too, by the way. So I want to give that was it. That was the moment. And after that, it was just refining it more. And then also another Brit, or of course he was a British man. It wasn't Scottish. I met up with Neil Adams when I was. At some point, it was an international training camp I was attending as a coach, and Neil Adams was there. I think he just recently retired from competition, and he was there as a coach as well. So I can't remember exactly where I first met him, but we struck up a bit of a friendship, and he offered me, he said, "Anytime you want to come and train with me in Coventry," where he had his dojo at the time. He's from Coventry in England. He said, "Come on over." I said, "I'll take you up on that someday," and I did. And some years later, I went back, and my wife and I and a number of friends of mine, we all went over there and stayed just a couple of weeks or so, and trained every day with Neil Adams. And he was very logical in his approach to judo, just like Morris Allen was, and very pragmatic. And again, he had the attitude of make it work for you. You do good, solid, skillful technique, yes, but mold that technique where it fits your body. I was always really hooked on Jujigatami anyway. I love the arm lock Jujigatami, and when I went over there and trained with him, it was like Jujigatami heaven. I mean, this guy
Huh.
really, oh God, he was tremendous at it, and he was the one that really developed me and or really guided me in the direction of some of the thoughts later that I developed when I started working on teaching Jujigatami more logically. And when I, by the way, the next book coming out in May is Jujigatami Encyclopedia. It's a reprint of the old book, and it's coming out again with YMAA Publications. By the way, real quick,
Oh, wonderful.
YMAA is just a tremendous company to work with. Their publications, they're very professional. David Ripianzi, the editor or the publisher and owner, has been nothing but good to me. He's a tremendous guy. So we're coming out with Jujigatami Encyclopedia again. But a lot of that you see in there, I want to give credit to Neil Adams for one. Now there was a lot of original thought, a lot of thought I picked up in Sambo as well. The Soviets in Sambo were masters of Jujigatami. So I stole a lot of their ideas and incorporated them and kind of refined them a little more for how we Americans think, or and from a judo sense. But nonetheless, these were the guys and other people as well. But these were the people that really influenced me to try to make things as logical and pragmatic as I can in the teaching and explaining of how to do judo. So this book, The Judo Advantage, is really an outgrowth of that, of how to logically think about how and why judo works. And so that's, and again, I give people like Morris Allen, Neil Adams, and a lot of other people, a lot of coaches here in the United States credit for that as well. But that was the moment working with Morris Allen. That was the light bulb going off on the big thick head that I have. But it was sure worth spending the time working with that man. He was tremendous. So
Now let's springboard off of that. So you, from Morris Allen, you learned how you started thinking about the kinesiology of judo and how judo works and making it work for you. How do you do that as a coach for your students and getting your students to understand how to make their judo work for them?
Well, I use what I call sequential teaching. Maybe somebody else calls it that as well. I don't know. I don't know if it's even a proper phrase. But for years ago, I developed the concept of teaching in layers. And it's like you're adding layers to something. Okay, so here you provide a basis. Here's the basic, core. So here's how to do osotogari. Basic way of doing osotogari, the generic way. Here's the technique, guys. Here's how we do it. Boom. And teach it properly, teach the good skillful technique, and then as they gain in mastery of that skill, as they get better, I don't mean to say they're judo masters already, but they will start mastering the skill. As they progress in that mastery, add layers to it, add more to that technique. Okay, so a good example, teach osotogari. I teach it in a stationary way, probably the way most people learn it. Break the balance, step in, reap the leg, take them down, throw them from a stationary position. Okay, they get that. Okay, we start with a good kumikata. We do all the kazushi, sakuri, kate, all that. Then I'll say, okay, guys, you're getting good now. Let's do this moving. So we do a very straight line movement drill, and we'll move them right into it, and they'll start getting it where it's moving. It may take a period of several weeks to get this skill down, but each time they come into the gym or the dojo, each time I want to make sure however we've added another layer to that technique, that they get it and they have some success with it, and they want to come back for more. And you just keep adding layers, and that's worked for me brilliantly, actually. And I think that's one of the things when people teach judo, we tend to expect people to do things automatically, great expectations the very first time. Well, he's a beginner, and he's going to learn it, and it's going to take time to learn that. And so we'll come back and we'll revisit. And another thing I used quite a bit is drill training. I try to invent drills for every phase of movement in judo. Just watch a judo match and you can see how many, anything that happens in a judo match, you can make a drill for. So what I'll do is I'll try to have a lot of interesting drills where they don't do the same old stuff all the time. They'll be doing the same old stuff, but it'll fool them. They don't realize it because it's a different drill. It's a different type movement. It's more fun to do. and you kind of keep working at it over a period of time, and it's an accretion. It's a lot like Kenny Brink, one of my great students who's now a great coach, said. He says kind of coaching by osmosis, and I think, yeah, that's a good way to put it. And so that's how we do it. It takes some time to develop that skill, and patience is a virtue in learning, and especially in judo. But it's amazing if you present things logically to a beginner, a raw beginner. They will pick that up pretty quick if it makes sense to them. If you say this is some mystical movement done by some monk in some cabin in the mountains, he may not relate to that. But if you can relate it to him in a way that it'll make sense to him. If you step in there and make sure, and you hook his leg like this and take him down, and that makes sense to me, coach. Thank you. And relate to them. And it's just good teaching. And I think in the book, by the way, I talk about that. I talk about how to literally start from point A and end up hopefully to point Z, and them doing it brilliantly. We hope, but that is mentioned in the book. How we do that. Teach by sequential learning is what I call it anyway.
When you teach a technique, and you're teaching the various movements, and you're teaching the different, you talk about the drills and such. At your club at Welcome Mat, do you dedicate maybe a couple of weeks or even a month on just Osotogari, or do you maybe teach one thing and then maybe you revisit it several weeks later? I'm just curious.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, because what we'll do, we'll come back. I'll introduce a move. Let's say Osotogari. It's a good example, and then we'll do that as a primary movement that night, okay, or that practice, and then we'll do other things too to keep it interesting. We'll do some newaza, we'll do this or that, whatever it may be. But we always come back and drill on that again. Then the next practice they come in, we will do Osotogari again. But we'll not do it the same way we did the other night. We'll do it a little bit differently. And they're still doing Osotogari, but they're doing it in a more interesting way. It's a different drill. And that's how I do it. And we'll go through that for a period of time, until I say, okay, they're good. But while it's maybe the second or third time they come and do the Osotogari, I'll say, okay, guys, guess what? What's the best counter for Osotogari? Another Osotogari. So we'll work on that to keep their interest up, and they've learned to counter to the Osotogari. So you can just keep adding more to that, like I said, adding more layers, and then eventually they're going to be pretty good at Osotogari, and then say, okay, the next thing on the lesson plan is this, and then we'll add something to that. Or we could say, a good way, I'll keep them on Osotogari. We'll say, okay, well, what's a good transition from Osotogari to the ground? What's a good, from that throw? And I'll say, well, I'll have something in mind for them. I'll lead them in that direction. I'll say, well, let's go right to Keisagatami. How about that? And then we'll throw Osotogari, and I'll have them, go Makikomi or whatever, follow through, and then get right to Keisagatami as a transition. So it keeps them interested. But then after a while, they're Osotogari'd out. Then you're going to have to say, okay, let's try another throw to keep their interest. And that's how I've always done it. And it works both for kids and adults in a very similar way. Adults pick up skills a lot more quickly than children. We all know that. But so, if it's primarily a kids class, and I do try to keep the kids and adults separated. I don't mix the classes. Some coaches have to. I totally understand it, but I always kept them pretty separate. I always had the older teens and adults together, and I always kept the younger kids separate. And we generally had a different lesson plan actually in both classes, but the adults will learn at a faster pace, so you can introduce more techniques to them in a while. And a lot of the videos you see me do now on our YouTube channel, I coach a lot of adults anymore. I don't coach a lot of kids, so you'll see them go at a quicker clip in learning a skill. Like we can do Okuri Ashibarai, the sliding send after foot sweep. They'll pick an adult, even a novice adult, will pick that technique up rather quickly in one workout, in one session at the dojo, and then we'll keep adding layers to it. So yeah, that's kind of how we do it. It seemed to work for me for a lot of years. I've been doing this. In fact, next year, later this year in 2019, we will be celebrating my dojo's 50th anniversary. I was a 17-year-old punk kid, had no clue what I was doing, when my then coach Ken Regulator, who was also a wonderful man, God rest his soul, a great guy, he loaned me a small 10 by 10 mat, and we put it out at the community center where I ended up working part of my career in public recreation. And at 17 years of age, that's how we started the judo club. And I had no idea that we were actually going to be having a club there for that long of a time, and we did. So it mushroomed. So whether I like it or not, I wasn't a very good coach, I could tell you. I was quite a poor coach at the age of 17. I was still a kid, but that's when I guess I started coaching at the age of 17. I was almost 18, and we so I'll be 50 years coaching. So I kind of makes me feel old. I don't know.
So, Steve, the Judo Advantage is forwarded by two gentlemen, Jim Bregman and Bruce Toops. Now, I am far more familiar with Jim Bregman. I think anybody who is doing judo in the United States knows that he's one of the very few Judan rank holders in American judo history. You probably had a reason to have these two gentlemen do the forward in your book. Why is that? Tell us a little bit about each gentleman, maybe what they mean to you and what they've meant to your judo career.
Well, we'll start with Jim. Jim, as you well said, is one of the greats of American judo of all time, and he's a highly respected man, not just for his judo. He's just a decent human being. And when I was a young man, I'd attend camps, and there was Jim Bregman coaching at him, or he'd be at a seminar in the early days of the USJA. I was a member as well. He was one of the early presidents of USJA and backers of it, and we'd go to his seminars or a training camp or something he was appearing, and he was always such a nice, gracious man. And there he was about a foot shorter than me, and I'm not saying that to diminish him in any way, because a guy like me had no chance against a guy like that. I mean, that guy was tremendous. His judo was so flawless, and he was always such a decent human being. He's been a mentor to a lot of us who were younger coaches and younger men coming up in that era in the 70s and 80s, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. John Saylor's another good friend of mine who worked with him more closely than I did, and a lot of other guys, a lot of other athletes and then coaches. And Jim was just one of those literally legends, and I don't use that word lightly, of American judo that made judo the rock solid thing it was for many years. He trained at the Kodokan. He was a Kinshusei, which was a special research student. Very, very rare to be that. I don't even think they've got that program anymore. And so he was one of the very few Americans who was in that program. And he has a wealth of knowledge. And he was always so giving with it. And, he's come to John Saylor's training camp, and I do that every year in Perrysville, Ohio, every May, which will be May 17th and 18th again this year, by the way, in Perrysville, Ohio. And Jim has appeared there in the past, and he's just given all of himself to teaching. And like one of my students, Derek Darling, was coming up, and he said to Derek, he said, "Hey, Derek, Derek likes Uchimata. Of course, Jim is a master of Uchimata." And he said, I'd like to work with you on Uchimata someday. Why don't you come to Washington, D.C. and, you can stay with me and train you, blah, blah, blah. And Derek did. And Jim took out his time, busy time, to work with that guy. Jim was pretty much retired from coaching, but he saw talent in this young man, and he helped him. He just, and he did so great. He didn't charge him a dime. He was just gracious. Right. And that's the guy Jim Bregman is. And I think a lot of people will say the same thing about him as I do. So that's one of the reasons. And I always looked up at him as being one of those really decent human beings in judo who was a great leader. And so he did the foreword for my very first book, which I look back and kind of cringe, but it was called Coaching on the Mat back many years ago. And Jim was gracious enough to do the foreword for then and for that book. And I asked him to do it again for this one, and I sent him the manuscript, the early manuscript. He read it, and he loved it. And he said, "Well, yeah, if I can." I said, "Please write a foreword." He said, "Absolutely," and he did. So that's why he wrote the foreword, and it meant a lot to me to get that from him. And then also now with Bruce Toops,
right.
Bruce Toops, I wanted Bruce because I deeply respect Bruce Toops. I think he's one of the great leaders, all-time leaders of American Judo. And a lot of people now have never heard of Bruce Toops, and that's a shame because back in the very late 70s, early 80s, right about 1980, when USJI, US Judo Incorporated, which is now USA Judo, was first forming. He was one of the rock solid foundation guys when it was forming. He was one of those guys there making those changes. Bruce is an expert at organization. He's also a master of judo. He's really, really brilliant at judo. And so anyway, he was one of those guys that formed US Judo Incorporated. And I was a young coach and just coming out of my athletic career. And I was I wanted to help. I wanted to be involved in the national scene. And he saw talent, a bit of talent in me, and he saw talent in other people too. And not just me, but a lot of other young guys like me who were just wanting to come into the real serious coaching ranks. And so he took me under his wing. He really did. And this was about 1980, 81. And so they started having, in those years, the U.S. Olympic Training Center started in 78, I believe. They started actually opened the Colorado Springs facility in 1978. And it wasn't long after that they started having judo there, judo camps, judo training camps there. So when Bruce Toops came in as the director of development, he became the director of development of U.S. Judo, a key figure in literally the director of development. He did that. And so he started having training camps there at the Colorado Springs facility on a regular basis. And as a young coach in 1981 or so, he and some other people identified me and some other guys too to come in and help with some training camps there. And then there were some women training camps. There were some junior training camps. There were some senior training camps for young guys coming up. And he wanted young coaches like me basically to be in the room to help them, kind of like a college wrestling program. And like somebody graduates from the program and they stick around 3 or 4 years as an assistant coach under the head coach.
Like an internship of sorts.
Yeah, right. And so that's what we were doing. That's what he was having us do. And he'd mentor us. He would give us advice. And the guy really knows judo. And he would say, well, try this, do this, blah, blah, blah. And it was all brilliant advice. And as time went on, he started giving me more assignments and giving me a little more responsibility and this and that. And so by about 85, he came to me. He said, again, he's the director of development for U.S. Judo. He said, I'd like you to put together a coach education program for, just teaching guys like you how to coach more effectively. And he said, I know you're young, you can learn more. And so I said, great, I would love to do that. So he picked me and he picked John Saylor to go out to, of course, John was at that time the training center coach, the U.S. Olympic Training Center, the head of the judo squad there. So he had John and I attend the U.S. Olympic Committee coach education program, which was fabulous. And I don't know if they still do that, but it was certainly tremendous for me and for John Saylor. And so he had us go through that. And based on their work and a lot of other stuff that he had me do, a lot of other research, we developed the rudiments of the first coach education program in USJI, now USA Judo. And so I was the architect of that, based on the good work that Bruce gave me. And he did so much for me. So he was my mentor. And then later, after we got that rolling, it was starting to we were having coach education training camps. We were having this and that. The program was growing. And he said to me, sometime around 87, about 1987, he said, I want to really organize the junior program, the under 21 program. And he said, I want you to take that responsibility. And I said, well, do this. He said, well, I want you to spend more time on the junior program. Okay, I will. And so, we still did the coach education program, but we spent more time than in the juniors. And so we developed a system of having training camps for the kids out in Colorado Springs. He gave me a budget to work with. And we had training camps in different parts of the country. We had one in Minnesota, here in Kansas City, and different parts of the country, and L.A. Frank Sanchez used to have a training camp for kids out there, and we've given some money to help operate the camp to a small degree. It wasn't a lot of money, but
Sure.
then he made available. It was through Bruce that made available for us to get access to the different Olympic training centers in Colorado Springs, Lake Placid, New York, and back then it was in Marquette, Michigan. I know they still have an education center up there in Marquette, but then it was a full-blown training center with the University of Northern Michigan, I think it was affiliated with. And so we would have training camps on a regular basis there, mainly through the summer when kids were out of school, but we'd have them at other times of the year as well. And he developed, and this was Bruce's brilliant idea, of having a system of training camps where we would identify the athletes coming up. In fact, he was the guy that invented the point system for fairly identifying athletes for selection for world teams and international teams. Bruce,
okay.
He was the man, he was the architect of that. And he had me develop a similar program for the juniors, the under 21 squad. And we didn't use like points. What we did was based on how well they did at the national events, the USJA nationals, USJF nationals, and then we had our USJI nationals as well. We would have those based on how they did there, and also some other selected big tournaments. I had a letter rating. A double A was like a kid like Jimmy Pedro. Obviously he was a double A.
Sure.
Or Sonata, just Olympic level material, in the making. And we had an A, B, C, and D. And so based on that double A down to D classification, and that would change, that would be fluid. And I literally had a card file of hundreds and hundreds of kids' names here in Kansas City. This is before the internet, before computers. I had card files on all these kids. And Bruce and I were in constant contact with each other on, we need to send this kid there and there. And he would give me a budget to send kids to, like I mentioned, Sweden earlier. We go there. They had a great high school age tournament in Sweden. And one year in 1988, we sent a dynamite team. I mean, we just cleaned up. I mean, we won. I think we sent 8 or 10 kids, and I think we came back with 8 medals. And most of them old. I mean, it was just tremendous. Jimmy Pedro was one of them. Clifton Sonata was another. Richard Lazat was another one. Greats in judo. And Bruce Toops was the architect of all that. He got me involved, and he got young coaches like me integrated into the system and part of the development program. So he was a great mentor to me. And I always got a lot of good advice from Bruce over the years. And we still have a good contact with each other. So when I started this project, and I thought of course, Jim Bregman to write the foreword. And of all the people I wanted, who I sincerely respect in this world, Bruce Toops is another one. So I called him and I said, Bruce, I got most of the manuscript done. I'd like to send it to you. And by the way, Bruce was never shy about criticizing when it needed to be done.
Of course, right.
Yeah, he was good about it. And I said, I want your critique on this. So he did. He sent me back a very detailed critique. Do this, do that. And I followed his advice, by the way, and it was a better book. So anyway, and he did he was very gracious to write the foreword for it. So he was the other guy I wanted to have on there. And I was so honored that he did. And so a lot of people don't know about Bruce Toops, but he was the director of development from, I think, sometime, don't know when, in the early 80s up through, I think, 1988. I think he retired from it to basically go back to his regular job. He was a very successful businessman, and he wanted to get back into normal life, basically, because he was spending so much time doing judo. And but during that period of time, during Bruce's tenure as director of development, we developed world champions Anne Maria DeMars, Mike Swain, Jimmy Pedro come up. You name any number of tremendous athletes in those years. And Bruce was heavily involved and directly involved in the development of these young people being world-class judo players. And now some of course, are great coaches like Jimmy Pedro and Swain, all those people, Anne Maria. Bruce was that guy. He was the go-to man. and very little is known about him. And as a result, he gets very little credit for the great things he did. Well, another good example, Kevin Asano and Lynn Rothke, they came up. They were 1988 Olympic medalists, both silver medalists. They came out of that development program that Bruce Toops started. And
So Steve, I want to springboard into and we discussed this earlier. And this is, I want to springboard based on what you're just talking about with Bruce Toops and the comments that I know you're aware of, that the president of the International Judo Federation, Mr. Marius Weiser, he basically put USA Judo on blast. And everything that you're saying here, so let me back up a bit. It seems that judo there's been peaks and valleys when it comes to judo in the United States. And you're talking about some of the peaks. And there's been another peak when it came to Ronda Rousey, Nick Del Popolo, 7 years ago or so, Travis Stevens, and certainly Kayla Harrison. That was another peak of American judo. And now it seems that we're back at a really a valley again. And that's not a critique against the athletes.
No, I agree.
And I think given what the president of the International Judo Federation said about USA Judo, I'm curious to know, based on your experience with all the work that Bruce Toops has done, and I know you're not on the inside anymore, but what do you think, what are you observing with the state of American competitive judo in how it is today versus maybe how it was when you and Bruce Toops and other people were heavily involved in the development program?
Well, I always had a saying, I might have even picked it up, stole it from Bruce Toops. When you have a doubt about how to proceed on something, look at the organization and look at how things are organized and how they fall into place and the infrastructure. And again, I'm not on the inside, but I do have friends who are on the board of directors or heavily involved in USA Judo, and they're really decent, good people. So it's not I want to stay positive on this because I believe they honestly are trying to do their best.
I believe that too.
Yeah, I really do. But I just don't know. I'm not privy to if there's money for funding for athlete development. I don't see any athlete development the way Bruce did, and I don't see recruitment for young coaches. Now they may be doing that. I just don't know about it. But I don't see that grassroots development that used to be there. We were, one of the things that, again, Bruce Toops and I was a big believer in was development, grassroots. Like the movie from the Right Stuff, no Bucks, no Buck Rogers. Well, that's clearly the case here. If you don't have a base to draw on, you're not going to have much of a base to draw on. And you've got to have a lot of people doing judo. You got to have a lot of people organized doing judo. And I think we need to really just reorganize and put back our efforts into developing more judo clubs, developing more people to get them involved in judo, and how we can teach it more efficiently and create a better infrastructure for those clubs that are maybe less expensive for them to have insurance, whatever it may be. That's why I sought out the AAU with the judo program back in the 90s, because I know the AAU, they at one time were the governing body, and then the AAU Judo Committee then became USA Judo, what it is now at that point, it evolved through time, USJI, but the same people who were running AAU Judo became USJI back in 1980 when it changed. But the AAU then learned their lessons, and they said, we've got to provide better service for our members, and they did. So when I approached them in the 90s and I said, we're looking for inexpensive insurance. Can we start judo again? And we did. And I think that's a case. There are people out there who can work with us in American judo and are willing to work with us in American judo, who can help us provide a better infrastructure so we can provide better insurance for our instructors and coaches and better practice insurance for our athletes and students, things like that. That's just one phase. But I don't know what they're funding. I don't know anything about where money is generated anymore. But if money could be set aside for going back to what Toops did with those judo camps at the Olympic Training Center on a regular basis. I mean, gosh, we had when I was a junior development guy, we had camps all during the summer. We'd have sometime a week camp, sometime a weekend camp, sometime a 2 week camp. And we'd book them in, and they were very cooperative in working with us. And of course, it came out of judo's budget, but nonetheless, we did it. And I don't know if that's still available. I just don't know. But I all I can say is that we need to look back at the organization and how that money is being transferred to the development of athletes. And that's what sports are about. They're about development, and that's where the bulk of the money, I think, should be going for the development of athletes. And I don't know if there's any funding at all available for if you make the world team anymore, the junior world team anymore. I just don't know. But I know back in the 80s and 90s when I was, the world team, junior world team coach a couple of times, that trip was fully funded for the athletes. Those kids didn't pay us, really anything, and the U.S. Judo paid for it. So
yeah, and these days, I don't think all of the athletes on the national team are funded. A lot of them to get over to these competitions over in like Marrakesh or Paris. Many of them have to pay out of pocket. They depend on donors really, and they're working a lot of full-time jobs. You're really just to be able to fund their
oh yeah.
Well, passion.
I don't want to imply that we were totally funded and everything was a gravy train. It wasn't, because believe me, my wife and I, Becky was a very, very good athlete, both in judo and sambo on the international level. We lived like paupers during those years, and where I had a budget to take kids over, I didn't get a salary.
Sure.
I didn't get a stipend. I did it on my own time, vacation time. I had a very lenient boss in my Parks and Rec system. They were very good to me, so I was able to do that type of thing. But if athletes are really having to dig deep in their pockets, that's taking time away from their training and their development. I would hope, I see it in other sports, maybe they can get sponsors to help sponsor these different teams. I don't know, but there must be, again, go back to the organization. It just somehow maybe they should come up with some different ways to develop at the grassroots level. And again, I come back to grassroots all the time because I think that's the main thing we've got to do. Whether it's USA Judo or the JA or the JF, or certainly us in our AAU Judo program and Judo Black Belt Association, no matter what the organization, just like what the old politician Tip O'Neill said years ago, all politics is local. It's a quote. Well,
right.
All judo is local too, really, when you look at it. And if you don't have that local club or local clubs develop athletes, having a national training camp does you no good, because there's nobody to attend, or the people who are attending aren't that very good at all. So they have to teach basics to them when they're there. And that's not a good situation.
Right.
So we've got to come back to the roots of what judo is, to develop at the local level, and work with other sports, work with sponsors somehow to get judo more involved in and I came back to it before, and I don't know into the inside baseball of it, but the NAIA, the NCAA, if we could talk to them about getting judo in the colleges. I don't know if that's possible. It may not be at all possible. I don't know. But different groups we could work with and try to get more exposure to judo, because at one time judo was a huge sport in this country.
Yep.
But again, so we also have to remember, back then there weren't a lot of competition. There wasn't a lot of competition for judo. There wasn't too much there wasn't any taekwondo. There wasn't too much karate. There was no Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There was no, like amateur wrestling is now very organized and huge. So there were less wrestling clubs around back in the 60s and 70s. So we did have that, gift of not having too much competition back then. But even now, in the current circumstances, why can't we work with maybe some other sports, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Sambo, or wrestling, to coordinate with some of these governing bodies for these sports and see if maybe they could attend some of our judo camps and coordinate with us, and work, some cross training there to maybe recruit some of these athletes from these other disciplines to come out and try for, international level judo or national level judo. I know in our AAU judo program, the rules are such, we have pre 2008, we have two sets of rules. We have the standard AAU rules, which are basically the Yuko, Wazari, and Ippon pre 2008 rules. That's one set. We also have the freestyle judo contest rules. So we actually have two sets of rules we work with. We did that on purpose so we could have more, our athletes could have more chance at development competition.
Sure.
And why shouldn't the governing body do that? Well, why not have different types of rules for different levels? I mean, that makes sense. So that's the thing about organization, and there you can work with people like us who will be glad to work with them and help them give our ideas and coordinate with programs. So yeah, I think, and I was going to make a point also that in a lot of our AAU judo parties, especially our freestyle judo competitions, we get a lot of BJJ and Sambo guys come into those, and they love the rules. In fact, I had one when James Wall hosted the Nationals. He's done it several times, but a few years back, there was a Sambo guy that walked up to me, and I knew him from Sambo because I'm involved in Sambo as well. And he said, I didn't know judo could be this much fun. He said, really? He said, I've been to judo rules competitions before, and he said, I got disqualified. He said, and I still don't know why I got disqualified. He said, but with you guys, I understand the rules, and and it was a lot of fun. And he didn't win; he took second, so he wasn't necessarily just happy that he won the gold medal. He
Sure.
did, but he was happy with the experience, and he's been back since to compete in those nationals again. So, that can be done. We can cross train with these other disciplines to get people involved, and we should. And also, our judo athletes should be doing Sambo and BJJ and submission grant, whatever, if they, we should allow them to do that. But I don't know if the IGF allows that or permits that if they're on the international team. I don't know if that's like a taboo they can't do anymore. I just don't know about the rule. But
yeah, they don't allow it if you're a highly ranked competitor, and it makes sense in the same way that you wouldn't want, for example, LeBron James playing wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns or something like that. So yeah, at that highest level, I think it does make sense, but certainly for any national level competitors and lower, that kind of cross training just makes you a better overall grappler.
He's saying that, we talk about the IGF rule about top level competitors. In 1983, this was an interesting thing about Anne Maria DeMars, a good friend of mine and my wife's. She won the world championships in 1984, the first U.S. athlete to win a world judo title. In 1983, she won the Pan American Games down in Caracas. Okay, well, I was heavily involved in Sambo too also at that time, and so I was kind of living a dual life there. And so I was the Pan American Games coach for the women's team, and it was my job to select a butt kicking team to go down to the Pan American Games. And of course, there weren't many women wrestlers, if any, at that time. So I naturally, my wife and my sister-in-law and Lynn Rothke and Gracie Jividen, all her, my wife's friends and women I coached over the years at camps. I said, hey, would you be interested in coming out and trying Sambo? And so we had some Sambo training camps, and we developed a great team. We won the team title, by the way, down there in the Pan Am Games, the Sambo championships. And so anyway, I contacted my good friend Anne Maria DeMars, and she was Anne Maria Burns at the time. That was her name, and I said, look, I'd like you to come out. It was our lightweight for the Sambo team for the Pan Ams. She said, oh, I'd love to, and so she came, and of course she took to Sambo like a duck to water. I mean, she was great, and but she also qualified for. Now we didn't have our trials yet for the Sambo team yet, but she'd come to the camps and trained with me and all that. But she also qualified for the Pan Am teams in judo, Pan Am Games in judo. So she could have actually gone both judo and Sambo because Sambo was first, and I think judo was a week later in the calendar of events for the competition.
Right.
And, but anyway, so Frank Fullerton, and he was the president of U.S. Judo at the time, and he did a great job at it. He called me, and I knew Frank quite well because I worked with him a lot in judo. And he said to me in his South Texas accent that he had a lot of people make fun of, but it was a good one. But anyway, he said to me, he said, Steve, he said, we can't have Ann Maria going on the Sambo team. She's going to do judo, and that's her main thing. And I said, well, I know that, Mr. Fullerton, but I think she could win the gold medal. He said, I think she could win the gold medal in judo too. I said, well, she could win a double gold medal. He said, no, you don't get me, son. He said, I don't want her to get injured in Sambo. He said, I don't want to take that chance. And he said, we think she can win. And yeah, that's right. And so anyway, he made a lot of sense. He made a lot of sense. And judo really was her main sport. And so I called her and talked to her, and she said, no, I want to win them both. But she said, I want to win the judo because I want to be the world judo champion. In which she won the Pan Am Games in judo. In the next year in Vienna, she won the world judo championships. And so she did that. She made history there. But we were that close to having Ann Maria be a gold medalist. I know she would have won the gold medal in Sambo. She would have won both the gold medal in Sambo and judo had she permitted to do that. But that was a totally common sense way to do it. That Frank Fullerton looked at it. It made absolute sense to me. I didn't gripe at all about it. I totally understood his position. I would have probably had the same position too. So, but yeah, that's how you can see. Sometimes you got to make that choice. And I see why the IGF has that rule for very top level athletes. But for the development athletes, we can still cross train. We can still have these people do different sports and get good at them and come back to their primary sport and be even better at it. And
absolutely,
and Lynn Rothke's a good example of that. She was a world bronze medalist in Sambo, won the Pan American Games gold medal in Sambo. Then she went on to have a fantastic judo career and become an Olympic silver medalist in 1988 in Seoul. So there was a good example of an athlete who in her development years cross-trained into Sambo and then used that experience with her tremendous talent in judo to be literally a world-class, Olympic level athlete. And I do understand IGF for their position. That makes sense,
Well, Steve, I really appreciate the time that you spent on this this podcast once again. I love having you on. I love hearing the stories. I want to congratulate you for your latest book, and certainly I encourage all my listeners to give it a read. You can get a hardcover copy of it, and you can get a Kindle version of it on Amazon.com.
Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble, or go to YMAA.com, anywhere books are sold. I didn't realize that. I thought maybe it was just Amazon. I didn't realize you can get it at Barnes & Noble. That's fantastic. Yeah, sure enough. And I'll tell you, YMAA has been great in marketing this. And I think the more people find out about it, and again, I'm not doing it for to get rich or famous. I'm a coach. I mean, that's really what I am. And at the heart of it, I'm actually rather a private person. I don't want to be a celebrity. I just enjoy coaching and teaching. And I think this book, again, getting back to the reasons I wrote it, I hope this book, when it stands on the work of many other great people like Jeff Gleason, Don Drager, many other great people who have come before me, and I'm certainly not in their league, but I hope this can be used as a great reference source for many years to come. And that was one of the points of it, because this is the kinesiology of judo. This is the biomechanics tied into the traditional way of teaching it. And you know what? It stood the test of time. And I think my book can be part of that positive addition to somebody's library and how to do judo more efficiently. So that's the way it was written. So yeah, thanks for having me on about that and let me talk about it, because it's I believe in it. I think it's a good product, and I think people will enjoy the book. I really do.
Fantastic, Steve. Well, again, it was great having you on, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch throughout the rest of the year.
We sure will. Good talking to you again, my friend.
Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style. Op.